And I'm also, for my day job, I'm a construction inspector covering sites in North and East London, so I spend most of my time investigating accidents, inspecting sites, and so on. I think the most important contribution I can make to this meeting is to explain what's happening within HSE and the prospects for the future for the legal framework for health and safety legislation from the perspective of someone who's trying to operate it and from seeing up close what the strategy is being developed within government and the health and safety executive. Mick is right. It's important. We have to start with a bigger picture. The government is attacking many of the gains made by working class people and working class organisations over many years. They're trying to shift power and wealth towards people who are already powerful and wealthy, and they're using the deficit created by the banking crisis to push through a wider agenda, dismantling the welfare state, privatisation, reducing employment rights, the post-war social democratic settlement under severe threat, overtly under severe threat from the government. So it should come as absolutely no surprise at all that health and safety at work comes under attack in that wider picture. Or particularly, actually, what's happening at the moment is a threat to the legal framework and to its enforcement. As Mick said, health and safety at work has been under attack from employers since the first Factory Act of 1833, and nothing's really changed. I won't repeat what he said. It should come obviously as no surprise to us that this government is returning to the question of HSE. Thatcher tried to dismantle and get rid of HSE 3 times in her period in government. And as soon as he got in, David Cameron appointed one of Thatcher's ministers, Lord Young, to undertake a review of the Health and Safety Executive. That, incidentally, the results of that review were better than many of us feared. It wasn't brilliant, but it was better than we feared at the time when it started. Since then, since that process of coming into power, David Cameron personally has been upping the ante on the publicity front, with attacks on red tape regularly, with attacks on burdens on business, and particularly attacks on enemies of enterprise. People like me are described as enemies of enterprise. He hasn't quite gone as far as Richard Littlejohn or the Daily Mail, who call us the health and safety Nazis, or the health and safety Taliban. Not quite gone that far yet, but that's the kind of drift we're moving in. It's an open secret that the government seriously considered abolishing the Health and Safety Executive when they launched their bonfire of the Quangos last year. They didn't, and instead, at the end of March, the Minister responsible for Health and Safety, Chris Grayling, issued a ministerial statement called Good Health and Safety, Good for Everyone. And it's the practical implementation of this report and its effect on HSE that represents I think the biggest attack on the legal framework for health and safety legislation and regulation for a generation. Mick's mentioned, I'm not going to blind you with numbers and statistics and stuff, but we can't start this without looking at the facts about funding cuts. HSE, as Mick said, faces a 35% cut. This is going to mean roughly 700 job losses according to HSE. That's from a workforce of about 3,000 altogether. 2 months ago, 200 left on a voluntary exit scheme straight away, and they're expecting over a period of time that they want this to go through natural wastage, or the new phrase is attrition. You see. It's not the case that the Health and Safety Executive is a bloated super quango. HSE has been suffering cuts for years. Under the last government, the Labour government, the workforce was cut by 940. That was a quarter of the workforce since 2003. Some sectors of HSE's work are running effectively on empty already. I'm going to give you a couple of examples just to give you a flavour of some worst case scenarios. Now, these are examples where the law exists, nothing's actually formally changed, but as Mick said, that the legs have been chopped off. There's nothing there. There's nothing behind the law. I'll give you 2 examples. HSE enforces the working time regulations. They're quite weak, but HSE enforces them. How many people do you think are allocated for dealing with this issue in London? None. The working time officer, sorry, I said Dan was putting his hand up there. I think he's the working time officer for this area is based in Bedford and covers North London, Hertfordshire, Berkshire, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Buckinghamshire, Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. One person. Such a low priority, it's non-existent effectively. In effect, there's 5 across the country. Let me give you another example. The Employment Medical Advisory Service, which is a statutory function for the Health and Safety Executive, has been reduced from over 50 occupational health doctors in the 1990s under Margaret Thatcher in that period. And incidentally, I was looking at before this meeting, I thought I'd better have a look at the Health and Safety Work Act and the Robins report that led to it. He wanted to see 100 occupational health doctors backed up by a whole range of nurses and support staff and so on and so forth. So 100 in the 70s, 50 in the 90s under Thatcher, and how many now? 3. 3, most of them part-time, 2 of them part-time. It's quite significant. So it's quite significant that the Lord Young review and Lord Grayling's ministerial statement barely mentioned health as an issue at all. Occupational health is significantly dropping off the headline agenda. The word coming down from the top is we don't want to use the word ill health, we want to use the word occupational disease and change the game a bit. We'll have to see how that develops. Prospect is mounting for what it's worth, we'll see what happens, is mounting or looking to mount a judicial review, a legal challenge on the question of EMAS. It's a statutory duty, and really, does it exist as a real living organisation or part of HSE? To give you a flavour of what happens where I work, I'm a construction inspector in London. I'm the Prospect representative for London. Alongside me, and I represent 4 principal inspector teams, 17 frontline inspectors, 10 training inspectors, and they cover all the construction sites in London, including the Olympics, Thames Tideway, the really Crossrail, all the big things, and all through to all the loft conversions, asbestos removal jobs, public sector refurbishments, extensions, basements, the lot. That's thousands of sites at any one time, about 20 odd people dealing with it. And at the moment, I and my colleagues are dealing with 20 fatal investigations and umpteen non-fatal investigations. Okay, that gives you a flavour of the kind of pressure and the stress on the organisation as a whole. That's an example of it. The cuts, so far, have not impacted on the number of inspectors. The number of inspectors is not going down yet. It may go down later, but at the moment it's not going down. Instead, the cuts initially in the first rounds have been aimed at publicity, awareness campaigns and other areas. I'll give you an example. The asbestos awareness campaign, which has been running now for 3 or 4 years, highly effective. It's won awards for being highly effective at getting a message across to carpenters, plumbers, heating, ventilation engineers, the people who find themselves suddenly working with asbestos, in asbestos. That campaign has been completely dumped due to a government edict on HSE. HSE's info line, which has its weaknesses, it's a privatised, outsourced operation, takes 800 to 1,000 calls every week. It's being closed on September the 30th and will be replaced. That's a useful resource for people to ring up. Workers ring up regularly, employers ring up regularly to try and find out their rights and what they should be doing and so on. And the other area of the cuts is in back office staff, which obviously has massive impact on everything else. And there's office closures. I'm going to move on to 2 significant areas that I'll just chuck into the meeting for discussion perhaps. In order to offset the cuts, HSE plans to bring in a system of cost recovery or charging for inspector time, what they're calling fee for intervention. And now this might be quite attractive to safety campaigners, it might be quite attractive to trade unionists. Why shouldn't employers pay when inspectors find that they failed to comply with the law? But you should be aware, this may not be a popular thought, that the Prospect branch and the inspectors are very strongly opposed to such a measure. It sounds quite attractive until you look at what it means in practice. In construction, for example, which is where I'm active, the overwhelming number of poor sites are the small sites, and we go to them all the time. And sometimes they're in extremely bad conditions, really, really bad conditions. There's a daily battle to achieve basic compliance with the law, and expecting smaller companies who are operating completely at the margins in an extremely exploitative situation with people who are working on minimum wage, below minimum wage, very poor wages, extremely unsafe conditions, to expect these companies to pay HSE for us to arrive on their sites is actually a joke. It's not going to happen. what's going to happen is HSE people who haven't paid their money. In addition, charging is going to completely distort the process of investigation, of inspection and enforcement. It's going to encourage a tick box approach as opposed to a holistic approach. It's going to be a complete bureaucratic nightmare. And on top of all that, just so you know, HSE hasn't got an agreement that any money raised in this will actually go to HSE. For all fines that happen as a result of prosecutions we take, all the money goes to the Treasury, not the HSE. Only 50% of accidents are reported to HSE anyway. If people think they're going to get charged for us to arrive on their workplace, are they going to? There's going to be an incentive not to report even more than is the case already. Okay. The most shocking, and I think the most important reason for having this meeting, I think, and the most shocking change and significant change that is coming through now is not being driven by the cuts or by finances, it's being driven by a deregulatory agenda. In his ministerial statement, Grayling announced a cut in the number of proactive is an inspection, proactive unannounced inspections as opposed to a reaction to an accident or a complaint or whatever, by 1/3. That's 11,000 fewer inspections this year starting on April the 1st, just gone. That's bad enough, but the practical implementation of that is much worse. HSE is going to continue to inspect the high hazard industries like chemicals, oil, nuclear and gas installations and so on. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that the newly hived off Office for Nuclear Regulation, the ONR, is being totally financed by the nuclear industry itself. And the following industries are going to be deemed as high hazard: construction, foundries, molten metal areas, waste management and recycling, quite high accident rates, woodworking, but strangely not furniture factories for some reason, and food and drink factories, because there's been a report by the Equalities Commission about the terrible conditions in many food factories. And that's it. That is it. Whole areas of the economy are being liberated from the threat of proactive inspections, and they include, I'm going to list them for you, the whole of the public sector, including health and social care, education, local government, prisons, the emergency services, public transport, including buses, airports and road haulage, the post office, parcel delivery, all the courier services, manufacturing industries like light engineering, electrical engineering, printing and paper, rubber and plastics, all being liberated, and furniture factories of course, all being liberated from the threat of a proactive unannounced inspection. This is the first time that's happened in HSE's history. I know many of these factories and many of these workplaces haven't been visited anyway for many years, as Mick has pointed out. That's been justified by the powers that be on the basis of budget cuts. There's not enough resources, we can't do all those things. This is being put through as a positive thing, as people being, as burdens being lifted from business. All these sectors will not have unannounced inspections unless, and they will be visited if there's been a serious accident, a serious complaint, or what is known as a matter of evident concern, something that we consider to be an issue that needs investigating, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, I'm going to wind up in a minute. Within construction, sorry, am I going on far too long? Within construction, just to wrap this up, we've been instructed not to inspect any construction sites with more than 15 workers, unless there's been an accident, a complaint, or a matter of evident concern. And this business of reducing the number of inspections is being justified on the basis that HSE wants inspectors, they say, to focus on high risk areas and for dealing with accident investigations, which is quite an interesting philosophical approach if you look at the whole history of health and safety legislation. We have no problem, obviously, with doing them more quickly, which is a big issue, if we can. But the whole point about the framework of health and safety legislation is to prevent accidents happening in the first place, not just to pick up the pieces and find fault after someone's been killed or injured. Okay. Finally, Grayling also announced a new review of health and safety legislation. It's being carried out by a professor called Lofstedt, and I'm going to read you a couple of the, it's going to report by Christmas, and I'm going to read you a couple of the terms of reference of that, just to give you a flavour of what this review is doing and where we're going to be going, heading by the end of this year, probably. Whether the requirements of EU directives are being unnecessarily enhanced, brackets gold-plated, on translation into English law, i.e. what can we get rid of that isn't covered by Europe. If there is evidence of inappropriate litigation and compensation arising from health and safety legislation, too many payouts. And the most important one, I think, if anyone who knows their health and safety law, whether changes to legislation are needed to clarify the legal position of employers in cases where employees act in an irresponsible manner. That is a major question, which if that is where they're going to go, then the basis of the Health and Safety at Work Act is seriously undermined. Of course, the unions are going to put effort into dealing with that, to put submissions into that. We need a united response to what's going on across the trade union movement. And this meeting, I hope, is just the start of it's a slow burn campaign, I think, to develop during the year. I'll jump quickly to some practical suggestions. If you are a health and safety rep, or a union rep for that matter, or you know any, you can report a matter of evident concern. Once it gets reported to us as a matter of evident concern, HSE will consider, and because inspectors haven't got many places to visit, they will consider favourably going to visit places that have been reported. That should be pushed through the trade union movement, I think. Too many health and safety reps don't call the HSE. They think they can just get on with it on their own. That's fine, that's good, they should do that, but really, come on, there's people here who can help, call them. I think the Right to Work campaign, Hazards, or whoever should be producing fact sheets or information briefings to the rest of the movement to explain what's going on, including motions to branches, model motions, and so on and so forth. I think the printing unions have to cause a fuss about their print factories not being visited. Same with engineering, same with education, same with all the different sectors, all the different unions have to start putting some pressure on here that what the hell's going on? The inspections have stopped. Okay. I'm going to finish. We're very aware within HSE that we're very small in number. There's well less than 3,000, 2,500 of us. We can't defeat this government's plans on our own. But the big question here is not about our jobs and our pensions and pay and all the rest of it, although they're important issues. The key issue here is about workers' rights and the historical gains that the trade union movement has made on health and safety at work. So we need unity across the movement. We definitely need serious action. There's far too much at stake now to allow these ideologically driven attacks to go through without throwing everything we have in the defence of the core values of what we, I think across the movement, consider to be the core values of a civilised society.